transition into what might be more exciting and newsworthy for our audience and talk about some of the content of what you do and what's happening in Europe and how you see the trends and what's happening over there, if that's okay. And I'm going to go back to this slide that I had up before, which is, I keep this. There we go. And it is the one of Europe there. So this is Europe. You have all these. You've mentioned a few times the consolidation going on in the industry. So, and we see the headlines on that. And, I was fortunate to be able to interview Rainer Kopitz with Katec here a week or two ago and talking about the acquisitions they had done and also their IPO and what's ahead for them, which clearly he communicated a desire for some more inorganic growth, as they call it. What is behind this? Not specifically, which companies are doing what, but what's driving that? Is this just smaller companies feeling that in order to be significant and to improve their position that they need to get larger and thus the consolidation? What's happening over there, Dieter?
There are different driving factors. Number one is if we, and I now have to grab this expression EMS once again. And I saw a very interesting interview with Rainer Kopitz of Katec earlier this week on LinkedIn with, I think Eric Miskel was the guy who interviewed him. And
it was brilliant, I hear. So.
Yeah, and Rainer said, we don't want to be an EMS. Yeah, we see each other. Different. We are at least an EEMS. Yeah, but in actual fact, we are doing even more than that. We are a full service company, and I can imagine if you look at the map. Yeah, you see how many companies, which I call EMS, are on this map. And let's be realistic. There is maybe the top 10, but other than that, they are all just me too. Yeah. So what makes them different? How can they convince their customers that they are offering something better or something different than the competition? Yeah. So we see people who avoid the word EMS at all, in order to make sure we are something different. We are different. And the point is, the margins are being driven down, especially if you go into these areas of CCC, computer, communication, consumer. Those are the classical high volume, low mix products, which in Europe are a lot of them manufactured in Eastern Europe. Looking at the United States, a lot of it is going to the Far East or it's going to Mexico. And we see in the Western countries, we see a totally different product mix with a lot of industrial electronics, with high mix and low volumes. Yeah, lot sizes can be. I just visited a small company this week in Switzerland, which you see as well on my chart up here, Foch Electronic. They are a small one, but they are a very good professional company, and they have lot sizes running on their SMD lines of 150, 200 pieces. Yeah, so it's a different market. Yeah, a market where margins are still better. So same goes, for example, if you're working in the medical industry. Yeah, margins are better there. I remember when Terry Gao from Foxconn stepped back as the chairman of Foxconn and was replaced by Yang Li. And the first thing we read by Yang Li was that he said, I want to change the strategy. we need to get into markets with more margin. And they are doing that. They are pursuing new markets. They are now having this joint venture on the semiconductors. They are going into the automotive industry, and they are looking what they can do in the medical systems industry. So there is a lot of things going on, which are the drivers. And I read as well in this one top 50 list a comparison of how much revenues per SMD line was done. And as far as I can remember, it was saying something about the top 10 do 31 million in revenues per SMD line. Now, imagine a company with less than 31 million in revenues in total will never be able to achieve that. So it is a fact that in most cases, bigger companies can make better pricing, which is a burden to the smaller ones. They have to be different. They have to supply a different service, a better service, maybe a faster service, being closer to the customers. There are many different ways, but there is the main driver is the fact that costs need to be reduced, and that is driving the companies to look for inorganic growth, to acquire other companies. And if you look at the age of this industry, the EMS industry is now in average 35 years old. Yeah. And there are many entrepreneurs who are now at an age where they have to think about retirement and have to think what's going to happen with my company. So there is are a lot of companies on the market, not always with reasonable pricing, but there is a lot of companies on the market as well, which are acquired by private equity companies. And the risk of this is that these private equity companies jump into it because they think they can make a big profit. And I can only tell you, if they don't know the market, they better leave their fingers off, otherwise they're going to burn their fingers.
Yeah, not all EMS are created equal in that respect. Tell me, you've mentioned it a few times too, or at least alluded to it, the whole issue of reshoring or regionalization, building in region for region. And that implies that maybe some work is transitioning back. What is your view of that trend from Europe? Is there greater desire to build in region for region? Is there work coming back from other regions of the world into Europe?
Well, we don't have to look too far back to see what the problems were when COVID broke out in the Wuhan area, and all of a sudden no supplies from this area, and later on in many areas of China didn't come anymore. And I have seen big original equipment manufacturers who had 100% of their supplies from China, and they were selling the finished products from the stores, and the stores were always filled from China, and all of a sudden the stores were not filled anymore, and when stores were empty, they couldn't make any revenues anymore. And they really panicked, and I received several calls from companies who said, well, we badly need to rethink our strategy. We will not be able to source 100% from one region anymore. Single sourcing does not necessarily mean buying from one company. It could as well mean buying from one region. And I can tell you, and that is the unhealthy example in our electronics industry, is the PCB industry. Now, we heard it earlier this week in your interview with John Mitchell, by the way, a great guy working for the Western electronics industry with the IPC being their president. I really like him. And in that interview, you said only 4% of the PCB demand in the United States is manufactured there. The rest is coming from the Far East. In Europe, it's even less. I think it is an unhealthy situation, and we have to rethink our strategies, and we have to include in the calculations the soft costs. And you know as well that we are nowadays talking about a lot about the environment, talking about carbon dioxide footprint. And if we take those environmental issues into the equation, China is not the cheapest anymore. And just earlier this week, talked with a guy who's having an online platform for requesting quotations from the EMS industry. And he told me he has already 40 Chinese companies on his platform who are quoting on Western European orders. And they have not received a single order as of now, due to the simple fact that Eastern European pricing was either similar or lower. So China is not, and for many years has not been the cheapest place anymore. It's not cheap. In certain areas, it's even dangerous how much technologies they have taken over, making us totally dependent. Just imagine that the Chinese PCB industry would tells you today, we're not supplying you with PCB anymore. What happens with all the European or United States electronic companies? What happens if the Chinese say, well, you cannot buy PCBs anymore, you will have to buy PCBAs? I think nothing is unthinkable or unbelievable. It's all possible.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point, and obviously there've been in the material supply chain, there've been challenges in the past year, and those are being felt very, probably getting the biggest press right now, or is the semiconductor piece there. But the example you just used about the PCB, as I think is a good one, because you're right, if they did. So is there a movement then within Europe? And I don't know the answer for here. It's a good question. Is there a movement to establish a PCB fabs over there? Is the government giving incentives to do that? Is there, if most of the material supply chain is still resident in Asia and China, they manufacture a lot of it. So you can reshore the manufacturing part, but you're sourcing everything from, or primarily from Asia still. Is there a movement within Europe to reestablish some of that in any way?
I have to admit, I'm not totally up to date in regards to the government programs which are happening in Brussels at the moment. I know that the French Association has been very active in this respect, and there has been a lot of funding of French companies to advance them in regards to technology and make sure that their market share is not further diminishing. But I am honest, I would have to consult with the European IPC. They have a representation in Brussels, and Philippe Léonard of IPC in Europe probably could answer this question much better than I do.
No, that's fair.
The point is we see in regards to, and that brings me to the semiconductor, we see a lot of discussion that semiconductor companies are thinking of building new factories in Europe as well. But they are at the same time demanding that up to 50%, and we are talking, I think, those 50% being 40 billion euros being paid by the governments to get this back. And in my opinion, we cannot just limit the view to the semiconductor industry.
Mhm.
Yeah, we have to look at the whole picture. Yeah,
Yeah.
and whereas I am not necessarily a friend of protectionism by governments, but if I look at China and how much of the production there is heavily subsidized, it makes competition very difficult for Western countries and Western companies who having to do all of this themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, and I appreciate your comments there about what you cannot speak to, and you're right with the semiconductor. They're talking big numbers, and that's over here too. With they're giving $30 billion to help fund, and Intel's doing things and TI's doing things, right, and trying to expand. But from that interview, what we did with John Mitchell that you referred to, our other guest on that was the CEO and chairman of TTM Technologies, and I believe in that conversation, we sized it to build a new PCB plant to do PCB fab would be $100 million roughly, right? And he also commented on how much cleaner those processes are these days than they used to be when there were more of environmental concerns there. So it just strikes me that with that, you compare that to the 30 billion, it's a drop in the bucket, right? So
yeah,
and you speak to the vulnerability that could potentially be could happen if that got shut down, if the supply got shut down all of a sudden and the game changed. So
let me just jump in with one other argument. Ever given the container ship which blocked the Suez Channel. Yeah. Now, everything that's on that ship is still in Egypt and being confiscated by the government. So we need to make sure, for many reasons, that we rethink our sourcing strategies and that we source more local. And it is not necessarily more expensive, but it is definitely good for the environment if we do that.
Yeah. Yeah, you remind me, old colleague with whom I worked used to talk about the risk in the supply chain. And he always simplified it by saying that the greatest risk in the supply chain is how many time zones you between where the order emanates and where the order is fulfilled. The more time zones you put within that, the greater risk you're putting into your solution. So I think that underscores what you just said too, and the whole argument about regionalization. So, but behind this too is, let's talk about the customers, the OEMs, right? So everything happens to service the OEMs in their production. I guess I have a couple of questions there. Let's stay on this topic right here. Are OEMs accepting of that and, or maybe advocating to some degree for more regionalization? Do you see any of that in Europe? Or do they where it's made?
I do think that we still have to do a lot of convincing of OEM customers. As I just yesterday studied the annual report of company Flex for 2020, there was a nice statement in there which was absolutely correct and told me what the drivers are, or explained what the drivers are. And please let me just read it to you. We believe that growth in the EMS industry will be largely driven by the need for OEMs to respond to rapidly changing industries, markets, and technologies, as well as the increasing complexity of supply chains and the continued pressure to be innovative and cost competitive.
Mhm.
That's a very, very true and valid argument. And the second sentence is, additionally, we believe that there are significant opportunities for global EMS providers to win additional business from OEMs in markets or industry segments that have yet to substantially outsource manufacturing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's, I think it's a brilliant formulation, and it hits the point very well expressed by Flex.
Yeah. And that was going to be the second part of my question about the OEM. So thank you for that. How do you see that trend? Do you see more outsourcing in, you actually once sized that, how much of the European market was being outsourced, I think, right? Didn't you have a rough on that?
Yeah, what just comes to my mind is something with Rainer Koppitz with Kartek. He took over electronics manufacturing from a company in Germany, which were doing the car lock systems for automotive cars. Now, this company, when you go back 20 years, the lock of a car was pure mechanic. And this company was the absolute expert in fine mechanics for such locks.
Yeah.
Now, what is a lock today? It is 50% electronics. Yeah, at least. Now, so this company had to change. They had to change from a fine mechanic company to a company being able to do electronics as well. And one day they made this calculation that rather than doing the electronics themselves, they were much better off and could improve their profitability by handing over the electronics part of their business to an expert in the electronics. And they chose Kartek, and Kartek took that over, I think, a year and a half ago. And they took over the assets, they took over the employees, and they are now running this factory, I think, with 150 people, close to Düsseldorf, themselves supplying this OEM company. Yeah. And I think if we have enough smart and clever OEM CEOs who realize that they can improve their profitability by working together with EMS manufacturers, they can definitely improve their profits. Yeah, they can focus on new developments, new product developments, new markets, and all of these things, and let the manufacturing part of the electronics being done by the EMS industry. And I think we will see a lot of such developments within the next 10 years. Yeah, it's everybody gets smarter, even CEOs of OEMs.
Yeah. And that's, I think, is the trend that I've heard you speak to before, is that there should be, or there seems to be more of a willingness to outsource than there had been 10, 20 years ago, and that should be driving, should be a boon to the EMS market within Europe. And so we hope that continues. Before I wrap here, I just want to ask, is there anything, I've heard you speak before about the industry sectors as well and what's happening. You just mentioned the 3 C's, but more in a historical context. And we've talked about the automotive, and I remember comments that you made once that the Baltic states, or the, was it the Baltics who didn't, no, the Scandinavia that didn't suffer much because they didn't have that much in automotive. So the downturn last year didn't hit them as much. So not those, but just generally, what's the landscape and how are you seeing the different industry sectors within Europe these days?
Well, looking at the different areas, we do see very different market sectors. As you just mentioned, in Scandinavia, there is very few automotive industry. In the East, there is a lot of high volume computer, consumer, and communication business. Then Germany has a substantial share of the automotive industry as well. Germany at the moment has about 20% of their EMS share, production share is for the automotive industry. I think in France it is even higher. Austria has a high share. Looking at the medical electronics, we have to see there are different areas. For example, we have some big global players who serve big global medical technology companies, such as, for example, Plexus in Romania, Flex in Poland, Zollner in Germany. They are supplying the big companies. But if you look at the medtech industry in Europe, 95% of all medtech companies in Europe are small and medium-sized companies with less than 250 employees. And those companies look for an EMS company, a manufacturing partner of a similar size. They don't not necessarily go to a real big company. They want to be seen as equal. They want to be seen as being an important customer, not just being, let's call it peanuts. Yeah. So Switzerland, being a high labor cost country, they have a substantial medical electronics share, and they can only continue with that high labor cost due to the fact that they're working in the medical industry. Yeah, so it's all very different. On the other hand, if we look at France or if we look at the UK, we see a higher share of air and space industry, including defense industry. Yeah. Which defense electronics, for example, France is the absolute expert on that. Yeah, we do have that in Germany as well, but to a lesser degree. Yeah, so there are always differences.
Okay, good. No, I appreciate that, and thank you. There's well, we've covered a lot of ground here, Dieter. There's so much more. Which is why I always appreciate these hopefully quarterly updates with you to see what's happening. You know, I'm a big fan of your research, as I said at the beginning. And for those in the audience who are watching this, if you're a European-based EMS and if you're not participating with Dieter and with in4ma with the research and the surveys they do, I would certainly encourage you to participate, to reach out, to get involved. And it just makes the numbers that much better, and I think it
Thank you.
The industry benefits as a result of that. So I thank you for that. So in closing, Dieter, I know you're getting ready to go on vacation here in a few days, and so good for you. Market research, though, what we've been talking about is hard and serious work, right? So I wanted to end with something a little lighter and a little irrelevant, if you would. It strikes me, I remember stories that you tell when you would go into the mountains and you would go away, and you're a mountain climber, and you would climb around in the Alps and do various adventures there. So I'm going to ask you a question that my sons posed to me yesterday, and it may be something that came about. And it was this: my sons asked me, do you know what an apex predator is, Dieter?
Apex?
Apex predator. An apex predator is an animal that's at the top of the food chain, right? So in different food chains, there are different apex predators, right? And we think animals out in, you know, lions, those types of things, right?
Yeah.
Various ways. So the question is simply this: what apex predator do you think you could beat up in a fight?
I haven't a clue.
Well, I looked in the Alps, Dieter, and you have wolves, you have bears, you have lynxes, right? You have these animals up there in the Alps where you're climbing mountains.
Yeah.
You know, if you ever had to fight one of them, which one do you think you could beat?
Maybe an eagle?
Yeah, that is an apex predator. Very well played. Yes, sir. Do you want to know what my answer was?
Was.
I said it would be Bigfoot. And I told my son, if you get a Bigfoot, bring him here, I'll kick his ass. So anyway.
Or maybe a hedgehog.
A hedgehog, there you go. This could be dangerous, I think. So yeah, something to ponder next time you're out climbing the mountains in the Alps. Be careful out there, my friend.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Anyway, listen, as always, thank you for your time today. Thanks for answering all of my questions, the relevant and the irrelevant. And I look forward to catching up again later this year. And I wish you continued success and safe travels.
Thank you very much for your time, Eric. And thank you very much for supporting my work and for those many brilliant interviews you always do. I watch nearly all of them, and you are doing quite a professional and very good news service for our industry, and that is very much appreciated. And we think you are a real pro for this industry. Thank you.
Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate that. My last question to you being, out of the not being considered there. Thank you, sir. Listen, enjoy your family when you get to go visit with them here this night.
Thank you.
All right. Cheers. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.